Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Sir Henson, for that very kind introduction. Good afternoon, and I would like to thank everyone for spending their weekend listening to this very brief lecture. I hope it's interesting for everyone. So it's basically a culmination of what I've learned in my 7 year stay in China. I will be talking about Chinese foreign policy, China's rise, and its implications for the Philippines. I think I will be touching on some topics, Sir Henson, na nabanggit ninyo kanina, like the party and democracy in China. So let's go to the first slide, if I may. Thanks. Yeah. So the title of my lecture is China's Rise and the Principle of its Foreign Policy. So which is also my specialization in what I did for my PhD. So when we talk about China's rise kasi, the understanding or the narrative there is that China is either a revisionist power or a status quo power. So there are two schools of thought. So some are saying that China is out here to unravel the global system that the Western powers before it has tried so hard to establish, which is based on very liberal peace principles. And then there are other schools of thought, mainly in China, who's arguing that China is actually a status quo power, and it's actually here to maintain and actually uphold the principles of the current system. Right? Well, we'll see. Next slide. So I guess the very important question that comes to mind is, why do we need to focus on China? And there are so many arguments for this one, but to simplify it, I just focus on three things. So first is security. So whatever happens in the region ultimately has consequences, not just for the region, not just for the Philippines, but globally. And China is at the center of the region. Whether we like it or not, we cannot ignore developments in China. We cannot develop in our own selves without considering our relations with China. Right? Unfortunately, it's not the same case for the Philippines. China can very well ignore what's happening in the Philippines because we are, for a lack of a better term, inconsequential to the development of these major powers. This is what we call asymmetry of relationships in international relations. We cannot assume that all nations are equal in the sense that the Philippines' capacity and capability is equal to that of China. Right? So there's always that asymmetry, and that's a fact of international politics. Second is prosperity. So this is very much obvious. The innovation that China is spearheading regionally has effects, leaps and bounds, even beyond the region. So for instance, the rise of electric vehicles and China's lead in artificial intelligence. Definitely we cannot ignore those. But at the same time, those have effects on the development prospects of countries like us, right? So prosperity is also one of the fundamental reasons why we need to focus on China. But for me, I think the most important thing is the duality that China represents. China still claims that it is a developing country, but at the same time, it has the characteristics of a prosperous nation. Its GDP per capita is equivalent to that of Mexico, but its technological output can rival that of the United States. China is a victim of colonization just like the Philippines, but at the same time, it's being accused of doing that same crimes to its neighbors. What other dualities can we think of? China is a very homogeneous nation when it comes to its racial identity. But at the same time, the Chinese diaspora, not just in the region, but also in the West, continues to have very strong influence in those societies. So the reason why duality is important, because I don't think any major power before it, from the Netherlands to Spain, France, UK, and America, US, had that duality with them. And China is the first, I guess, non-Western power to command the international system in the way that its previous peers did. Next slide, please. So a little background on China's rise. Next slide. So, of course, we all know that socialism is the chosen path of China's rise, or China's political system is based on this ideology. So after decades of war and foreign domination, China's leaders, China's political elites saw it that socialism is the way to industrialization. Medyo paradoxical yun because when we know of socialism, we associate it with, at least the layman perspective is that socialism is associated with slow growth, equality, but not so much industrialization. But this is actually where the misconception comes in because socialism was adopted by China because they were trying to emulate what the Soviet Union was doing before it. But of course, after much learning, China reframed and adapted that socialism to their national context. So yung Marxist-Leninist principles of the Soviet Union was not directly adapted to the realities of China. This is where Mao's political thought became useful, and this is where I think there's still an impact today. Contrary to popular belief, China is not, in my perspective, China is not there to export the development model it has, its political system, precisely because its experience is not really tantamount to that. China's experience is learning from others and then adapting it to the political and social realities of its own country, right? So under Mao Zedong, China introduced the three socialist transformations. So public ownership of agriculture, industrial and handicrafts industries, which ultimately paved the way for industrialization before it opened up eventually. So it industrialized rapidly, but at the same time, it has costs for its population. So you have the Great Leap Forward, and you also have the famine that came with it. In China, at least when I was there, they were not really hiding these facts, but at the same time, admittedly, it's not being openly talked about, right? So, ang parang summary lang nila, Mao Zedong had 70% victory, 30% losses. And we just leave it at that. But it's open for interpretation. But even until now, their great leader, Xi Jinping, still praises and learns from the example of Mao Zedong. Right? So I think there's no disputing that Mao Zedong still has deep influence into where China is going, at least in the next decades. So, so the period prior to opening up has built important state and industrial foundations. But radical campaigns also caused these severe disruptions. So this is what pushed the next leader, Deng Xiaoping, next slide, to actually open up. So just a quick commercial. So examples of Mao's continuing legacies, the core socialist values. So these are the core socialist values in China. Siguro every kanto sa China, makikita mo yung core socialist values na kapasir. So socialism is like a religion for them. So it's an atheist country. But when it comes to, I guess, the same conviction, faithful conviction towards something, you find it in the Chinese people and how they treat their leaders, their founding fathers, and at the same time socialism. So they continue to uphold these socialist values, at least rhetorically or discursively. Next slide. So yung famine and everything that Mao was not able to do correctly. This is what inspired the next leaders, starting from Deng Xiaoping, to actually sort of reform China, and it's the main reason why they ultimately decided to open up. So integration was not the main objective, or was not the end goal of China, but it's certainly China's route back to being a major power again, to rising up to that humiliation that it experienced in the past. So from 1978 onwards, market reforms, special economic zones, foreign investment, and export manufacturing became the core concepts, if you will, of China's development. And then 1992 comes the Deng Xiaoping's Tour of the South, where basically it's also strategic for him because during that time there were already criticisms of China's human rights track record globally, internationally. So this was 1992. So to appease the crowd, to appease the international audience, Deng Xiaoping was doubling down on China's commitment to opening up its economy and being part of the international trade system. And then come, I think, one of the pivotal moments in China's history, which is 2001. This is when China joined the World Trade Organization. Right? So when China joined the World Trade Organization, it was a celebratory moment, not just for China, but I think also globally. So I was young to remember what happened in 2001, but because of this, many export industries in other developing nations, like the Philippines, also had to compete with the cheap market of China. And I think around this time, around this decade, dun pumasok yung idea natin of made in China. And when we talk about made in China, it's the cheap, but the quality is not so okay, right? So, but now in China, at least when I was there, they are re-embracing that trend of made in China. Actually, they're putting it in their goods. Siguro the font size is bigger, and they're adding like another adjective. They're like proudly made in China or something. So it's a patriotic act for them, but at the same time, it's also changing and taking control of the narrative that made in China today is different from the made in China back when it integrated in WTO, right? So when I was parking my car sa parking natin, I cannot help but notice na ang dami ng Chinese cars. So made in China is really, the transformation is also very quick and rapid. When I left for my PhD during the pandemic, hindi ganyan kadami yung EVs and Chinese cars. So up to today, the rate of transformation that China has shown from 1949 to WTO acceso, ganun pa rin kabilis. Or actually, mas mabilis pa. Right? So, 2009 to 2010, this is another pivotal moment for China and the global system for two things. First is the global financial crisis. And second was the Beijing Olympics. So, global financial crisis, everything was down, to simplify it. But China was here proudly saying that, okay, we will host the Olympics in 2008. So, yes, the global economy is down, but we're still, thriving, and we will, prove this by hosting one of the most important international events in the world. And next slide, please. And actually, makita. But this is my language textbook in China. So yung nasa harap lagi ng front cover ng mga textbooks in China, or the stadium in the bird's nest. So this is the stadium of the Olympics in 2008. And the high-speed railways, yung pang-compete nila sa Shinkansen ng Japan. So, yeah, it's the same thing. So ganun sila ka-proud na this is the new China. Yeah. So, yun din yung tawag nila sa China ngayon is New China. It's not just China. So, they are Xinzhongguo. So, Xinzhongguo is New China. So, when they talk about their country, they always emphasize that it's not just modern, but it's actually new. And quite frankly, revitalized. So, next slide. Okay. So, while all of that was happening, and this is from the perspective of China, they think that with China rising, other countries, led by the US and the West, is trying to contain China's rise. Right? So, engagement, so parang ang narrative in China, here we are, we integrated ourselves in the global economy, we contributed to global prosperity, but everyone else is perceiving us as a threat. Our rise is not beneficial to them, for them. At least that's the perspective. So Western governments, their primary objective for allowing China to integrate is for China to also become like them. Right? So that was the initial objective of at least the US and the West kung bakit pinayagan nila na join ang WTO si China in 2001. Maybe if we allow China to integrate its economy, it can hopefully become also a democratic country. This is classic democratic peace theory. If countries trade, if countries focus on economics, no, then prosperity will follow. Then after prosperity, democracy will follow. The kind of democracy that we know in the West, which is we go out of elections, there are multiple parties to choose from. No? But come 2010s onward, the West is seeing that's not happening in China. Actually, it's the opposite. The more China becomes prosperous, the more the Communist Party becomes stronger, right? So that's a big question mark there in political science. We thought in the study of politics, we always thought that economics and democracy goes hand in hand. But China's case, the biggest political system in the world, shows otherwise. So it's because performance legitimacy is the name of the game for the Communist Party of China. The more that China develops, the more na sinusuportahan yung Communist Party. And the more na kailangan mag-maintain yung authority ng Communist Party. Right? In China, what I always say to people I meet here in the Philippines, it's the equivalent, supporting Xi Jinping is the equivalent of being woke. Right? At least for millennials and Gen Zs. Being woke, being socially responsible. Right? 80% pataas ng population sa China supports the Communist Party. My classmates, majority of them, if not all of them, are members of the Communist Party. Right? So it's a badge of honor to be part of the Communist Party. And whenever I encounter like a teacher or another student, they would always ask me, "Oh, anong party mo sa Philippines?" Kasi ganun sila mag-isip. They think in terms of party. Ganyan. So sabi ko, wala kami political party. So, sinasabi ko lang, Catholic. So because of that, because of prosperity, because of development, power is consolidated, is becoming more consolidated with the Communist Party. Right? Next slide. So now comes the conundrums of Chinese foreign policy, or questions about Chinese foreign policy. So there are many lenses, many perspectives to adopt whenever we want to understand Chinese foreign policy. But for me, to keep it simple, I always go back to history. And I think the enduring legacy of humiliation and defeat is the main motivator or the main influence for how China conducts its foreign policy today. So my argument is that no historical experience has shaped China's contemporary foreign policy more deeply than the century of humiliation, which happened from 1839 to 1949. So you have the first Opium War, and then after that you have the unequal treaties by Japan, Russia, and the West. And then you have Japanese invasion during the Second World War, and then the founding of the Republic. So, key example that I am kind of amazed about, yung kanilang Second World War. When we think of Second World War, it happened in Pearl Harbor, again, Nazis, ganyan, invading Poland and other parts of Europe. For them, it started earlier, 1938. That's when the Second World War happened. Yeah. The Mokden incident. Yes, that's the start of the. That's the start of the.
Ina. Sasalita.
Bang, habasik po. Isa habasik.
Ano ko ba yung pumunta rin ng kay Juan, ha? Yung aking idol ako.